All right, hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about a little more detail about creating a site, managing sites in Dreamweaver, creating a new site, adding servers, testing servers, using MAMP. I have WAMP on here, but now it's just called WAMP. And some of the advanced settings for sites like cloaking and design notes and things like that. And also talk a little bit about exporting a site and importing a site. Basically everything about sites that you ever wanted to know. All right, so here we go. So we're in Dreamweaver here. To create a new site, I'm going to go up to, and you may have seen a little bit of this before, but I'm going to do it, start from scratch here. I'm going to go to Site and New, and then I get the site set up here. And I'm going to call this Test Site 1. Doesn't matter, again, what I call this. It's just an internal Dreamweaver name that Dreamweaver uses to remember or help you remember what site you're working on. And then under local site folder, I'm going to click on the browse for folder, and I'm just going to go to the desktop here, click new folder, and call it site 1, and click create. And then I click choose down here. It may be a little bit different on the PC. It may say select, I think. Sometimes it's a slight differences, but not a big difference. So I've got test site 1, and then I've got local site folder, users Drogmar, and then desktop site 1. So that's just the path to that site. And I will say save. And it makes a site. So what happened? I don't know what happened. But if I look up here in files, it says test site 1 under the drop down here for the files. And then there is a folder there that says site 1. So if I right click on that, you may have seen this as well, I can go to a new file and make a new file. Let's say I call that page 1 or something. So I just right click on that and go to new file. If I right click on it and go to new folder, I could make a new folder if I wanted to. Maybe I make one for images, anything like that. So I'm just typing there, it's already selected, and I hit enter and it's in there. So that is the new site there. You can see that there's a little drop down here, and that has all the sites that I have on this computer. So again, that's only sort of saved on the computer that you're on. Unless maybe if you're using Adobe CC Cloud, Adobe Creative Cloud, it may save sites for you. I haven't really tried that. But I'm going to show you how to import and export sites anyway. So if it doesn't, if you don't have that working, or if it doesn't support that, then you can just do it by exporting and importing sites. But basically what the site is just memorizing some settings. It's not your actual files. That's important to remember. There's also a button here that says define servers. If I click on that, it goes back to the same window that we were in, which you can get to also by going to Site and Manage Sites. A third way, well, actually that's a different window. That will give me all of my sites, and if I double click any site, it will get me to the window we were looking at. So let me show you that one more time since it was a little bit. I'm going to click done here. I'm going to go to Site and Manage Sites, and then there's all the sites on the computer. We'll come back to this window. And I can double click to go into a specific site. So before we do that, let me show you what's in this window. So here's all the sites, like I said, on the computer. You can do a new site here as well. You can import a site, but what do you import? You're importing a file that Dreamweaver makes. It's called an STE file. So over here on the left, you've got, let's say I've got test site 1 selected. If I click that minus button, it deletes that site. So that it doesn't delete your files, it just deletes the settings that you're setting up in this site. When you create this site, this little procedure that we're doing here. You can also edit. Same thing as double clicking. If I click on that, you'll get the same window. Or if I double click, I get the same thing. The next one here is duplicate. So you can duplicate a file, a site if you wanted to. That just duplicates the settings. You can also export. So if I click export, I'll go to the desktop, and you see it says test site 1.ste. That is a Dreamweaver specific or proprietary file format for site settings. You could import it, and it will not import your files, but it'll import your settings, things like your servers and where your files are and things like that. But it doesn't import, it's not your actual whole site. So don't make the mistake of thinking, well, I exported the site, I should have all my files. You're not. You're just going to have your settings there. So that's what that does. If I wanted to import a site now, I could click import, and there's the site I just made. If I click on that and I click open, it would import it. We already have it, so it doesn't matter, it makes sense to do it, but you can import and export site files from this folder. But it's just the settings again. I'm trying to say that a lot of times so you don't get confused and not have your files. Okay, so that's site 1. Also, let me click done here. If I click on this drop downs that I showed you where all the different site files are, if I click on an existing one or one that I'm already on, it will open that same folder again, the servers and things. So lots of ways to get the same stuff. So let's look at this window here. So here we've got our site. That's where we set up our site name and our site root folder. You see it's checked. I guess that means you did a good job. I get an A. Yay! If I go to servers, that's where you can add servers. So what is a server? A server is, if you're doing like a dynamic site, like with PHP or some other types of dynamic site technologies, you might want to have some servers. You can also have a local server and a remote server. If you have an actual web host, you'll have a list of servers there. So let me click on plus here. That's how you add a server. I'm going to click on plus, and you'll see the settings for that. So here I can name a server. Let's say I'm going to say this is site 1 web host or whatever. That's just telling me that that's the name of the server. It's just a listing for you. It doesn't actually do anything, this server name. But the rest of this does. So you can connect to a server using all these different protocols. So FTP is file transfer protocol. SFTP is secure, and then you've got a few other ones that you might use. Some of these are for web development files, and you can also do a local server, which I'll show you in a little bit. FTP address. So the rest of this you would get from your web host. So say you're getting you're going to a web host like Bluehost or something like that. When you pay for a web host or even a free one, you'll get this information from them. So you get the FTP address, you'll get a username, and you'll get a password. These you'll probably set yourself, but that you do that when you sign up for your web host. So when you have a website, you probably know this, but you need to be able to have your web files on a server somewhere so people can access them through the web server. So that's what you're setting up. You're setting up a server that you can send your files from your local computer, which is my computer, or your computer, to the web host. Once you set that up, you can click test, and I'll show you this in a minute too, in an actual working site. But you can click test to make sure it's working. Then root directory. Sometimes, depending on your web host, you may not need anything there, or you may need something like public_HTML or www or different kinds of folders. It's basically the folder where your actual web, your HTML files are. Sometimes it's necessary to put something in there. Sometimes it's not. Your web host will tell you that. Underneath more options, there's a few things that you might need to use. Use passive FTP. That's kind of checked by default. I don't know if it used to be, but sometimes that won't. Your connection to your web host won't work if you're not using that selected. But it's already on there, and there's other things there too. We probably don't have to worry about that too much at this point. So that's under the basic tab. Under the advanced tab, you have a couple of things. You have maintain synchronization information. That just means it's gonna try to remember which files are newer on your host or your remote, or your local files or your remote files. Automatically upload files to server on save. If I click that, whenever I save my local file, which means my file on my computer that I'm working on, it'll upload it to my web host as well. So you can have that on or off. That's up to you. You can do enable file check-in and check-out. So if I say enable file checkout, when I open a file, this is a second checkbox, and I have to put my name and email address in there. What that does is if someone else has access to your site, it's sort of a rudimentary version of versioning. If I check out a file, if I open a file from another computer, maybe somebody else is working on the site with me, then it will sort of lock the file and it will say, hey, somebody's got this file checked out. What that's for is to prevent the situation where two people are editing the same file at the same time, which you can imagine can cause problems. So if you're working on a website with someone else and you're both accessing the same online files, you might want to try that. This is a Dreamweaver only feature. There's other ways to do versioning, like using GitHub and things like that, but this is built into Dreamweaver. So if you check that, then when you check out a file, it will check it out and it'll kind of lock it for while you have it checked out until you check it back in. So I'm going to turn that off, but that's what that is. Testing server, you can pick the server model. So these are different sort of dynamic ways to do websites: Cold Fusion, Java server pages, PHP, and MySQL is probably the most popular. There's also some ASP and things like that in there. So that's what that's for. You have a couple checkboxes here as well. Automatically push files to testing server. That means it's when you save, it sends them to the testing server. And automatic save of dependent files means if you save your main file, it will try to send the support files as well. So that could be like probably extra PHP files, or it could be CSS files, that kind of thing. So you can check or uncheck that. You can always send them manually too. Okay, so I think that's it on that. And again, I'll show you this with some actual settings in here in a minute. I'm going to go to CSS processors. So this is a bit new. So CSS processors is preprocessors, not processors, is a way to have sort of programming inside of, and variables and things like that inside of CSS. So Less and Sass are the two most popular ones. Probably talks about that somewhere in here. But that's beyond the scope of this this lesson here. But here's Less and Sass. But we may get into that later, we may not, but it's pretty popular, so we may talk about it. But that's where that is set up if you want to do CSS preprocessors. And it basically processes your CSS using sort of a different version of a different language a little bit, and then it outputs CSS to your actual site. It's a little complicated, I won't lie to you, but that's what that is. So that's located under here under CSS preprocessors. And then under advanced settings, there are some more options here that we should probably look at. So under local info, you could have a default images folder there if you wanted to set that up right away. You have, this is pretty important as well, links relative to document or site root. If you say document, it's going to be document relative links, which means it tells the browser how to link between pages using relative links. Kind of going up in a folder hierarchy or down in a folder hierarchy. So I have a little page on that. This is from the Dreamweaver help, actually. And so it talks about those different kinds of links. So you probably know this already, but if you didn't, so a document relative link will look like this. This means go into a folder called Dreamweaver and find the page called Contents. This is called an absolute path. You wouldn't use these too often as links in your site, but this means the actual location on the web or a computer where an actual file is. The problem with these is if you use absolute paths, once you move a file, all those links break. So, it may have certain possibilities, like I use them sometimes when I link to a CSS file on a completely different site. So that may be something you might use it for, something like that, but generally you're not going to use those too much on your sites for this class anyway. This is again relative. That means how am I going to get to the file from where I currently am? So you can go up or down inside of your folders. There's also a third type called site root relative paths, which means basically what this means when this / is in the front here, right here before support. Blow that up a little bit. This / right here, that means go to the root folder of the whole website and start from there. So it's kind of like starting over. This says go from where I am currently in my current file. This means go to the very beginning, back to the main folder of my site, and then go in a folder called support, and then go in a folder called Dreamweaver, and then go find contents. Both of these would work. The difference is this one only works from a certain page that is one level above the Dreamweaver folder. This would work from anywhere. The problem again with this though, like you're thinking, why don't I just use these all the time? If I move a file, then these break, even if the path didn't change. So generally you're going to use document relative paths, but for certain files that you want to be able to link to files that are not going to move maybe, then you want to maybe use a site root relative path. Yeah, so that's what that's about. Generally, you're going to use these document relative ones though. All right. Hopefully that made sense. Okay, so the rest of that's probably, we don't have to worry about it. This cloaking section under advanced settings means you can cloak files. What does that mean? You can't see them? Basically, you don't see them in certain windows. So if you didn't want to see your certain files, you could just do that, cloaking. Maybe you don't want to see your PSD files or something, you can turn that on. And you can add them here, a list of those here. Here's PSD right there. That means you can't see a PSD file in Dreamweaver itself if you don't want to be able to see it there. Design notes. So what are design notes? So it says maintain design notes. That's already checked. And then enable upload design notes for sharing. So what design notes are, you can add a note to a file, and it can say something like, hey, work on this page, or fix this image. You can leave notes for yourself. You can leave them for other people. And then they will open when you open the file. So if you want to use design notes, you just check that. And what Dreamweaver will do will make a note and save it in your site, and then it'll be available for people who open the design notes for that page. Kind of a way to keep track of versioning or notes for other people. Generally, it's for sharing work with other people. Wouldn't do it too much for yourself, but you can use it by yourself to remember things you want to change or update or whatever. File view columns, that is what's going to show up in the files over here in the files panel, so it's pretty self-explanatory. Contribute is probably obsolete. It's an old Macromedia or Adobe system for updating pages. PHP versioning is there. Templates, you don't really have to worry about too much of this stuff. jQuery, if it wants to know where you want to save your jQuery assets, it'll set up a default sort of naming convention. You could change that if you wanted to. Same with web fonts. If you're using web fonts on your page, on your site, this just means it's going to actually make a web font folder called web fonts. You could change that right there if you wanted to. And then the same thing with animation assets if you're doing some animation. So it's just setting up default names and locations for those folders. I think that is good on that one. So let's go ahead and cancel that. I wanted to show you what this looks like on a site with actually some server setting up working. So I'm just going to go up to this GDES site. It's an older version of the GDES website. And then I'm going to open a page. Let's just open, let's say, graphicarts.php. So there's this page, but it's kind of blank. Why is it blank? Because this is using PHP includes. These are called PHP includes. It's kind of assembling the page from different files. Up here at the top, you've got the related files, which you'll see later, I think, in other videos. But this means this page is made of other files. Different PHP files. One's for the footer, one's for the menu, and one's for the page top. So it doesn't render correctly in Dreamweaver. It doesn't matter if you're in Design View. Well, Design View you can see some of it, but that's definitely not how that page looks. It's sort of without any styles or not even fully assembled. And then Live View doesn't show you anything at this point, right? So I wanted to show you how you can make that happen a little bit, where some of these design sites or these dynamic sites. So I'm going to go open a program called MAMP, and this is MAMP. It is and as soon as I did that, it opened up this web page. It says MAMP has been turned on and installed successfully. So what does that mean? It basically set up a little server on my computer, my local computer. So you can go look up MAMP anytime you want. It used to be MAMP for Macs and WAMP for Windows, but now it's just MAMP for both, I guess. And there's other apps that can do this kind of thing, but MAMP's the one that I use. So now it says up here, if you look up here, it says Apache server is on and MySQL server is on. So I basically have a web server and MySQL, which is a database server, running on my computer now. Obviously, I had to set that up ahead of time, but that's what's going on. So if I go back here now and I close that file, because it may not work if I don't reopen. If I open it again, hey, look, the page shows up. That's because now there is a web server running on this computer. And that is also, the other thing I need to do besides turning on the web server is to point to it with Dreamweaver. So if I go to Manage Sites, or just click over here, I could have clicked that as well. And I'm going to double click my site. So here's the site, we've seen this already. But if I go to servers now, there's stuff actually in there. So this has 3 servers. It has my local server, which is right here, and it says testing. So this is a testing server, which means it is a, just like it sounds, I'm gonna run it locally here on my testing server. So that's what I'm looking at, and that's actually in a folder that I set up for MAMP, an HTTP folder that is basically running as a web server. So using MAMP and on this computer and turned it on, it's running a web server on the computer, and then I set that up. If I double click this guy here, you'll see it says the server name is GDES. It's on a local network because it's on my own computer. Here's where it is. It's in the MAMP folder, in a folder called htdocs. There's a lot of details here. I'm kind of skipping over a little bit, but that's where the server is. And then here's the web URL. I could even go to it in a browser. So that's a testing server, a local testing server. And then here is the remote server. So if I double click this is actually where the files are on the internet. So remember I showed you this before. Here's where I put in my FTP address and my username and my password. And now, since I put in all that information, I could click test and see if it works actually. Yeah, it says Dreamweaver connected to your web server successfully. So that means I am connected now to my web server. Here's my root directory. I'm not out in the open here. I'm actually in a folder called Departments, and then I'm in the folder called GDES inside of that one. That is on the Mission College website, or an older version of it anyway. So that is that. So that is my remote server. So here's my remote server. It's checked under remote right there. Here's my testing server. It's under testing. And then this one is just another server that I have, but it's not even turned on. I don't think so. You can add as many servers as you want. I don't know why you need more than a couple, but you can add a testing server right here by just clicking plus and then filling out all the information. All right, so that's that. So that's actually running on the local server, and I'm connected to my remote server that way. So I think that is it for creating a site and setting up servers, and also we did set up a testing server. We went through the advanced settings and exporting and importing a site. Yeah, so I will talk to you again next time.